Well, thank you for the opportunity. We're going to be talking about near-death experiences, which, as we were kind of prepping last night for our discussion here, we talked about how much collective mistakes we have made over the course of careers that span 30-plus years for all of these distinguished panelists. So I'm actually very excited to be talking about this. We are going to take it into what I believe is the most constructive way, which is trying to share the lessons learned, what we wish we hadn't done, and what we would do all over again if we had to face the same challenges. It is obvious that we learn a lot more from when we fail and when we face challenges than from when we succeed. So we hope this is going to be helpful for all of you as we share, as I say, many, many years of collective experience here. We also have two sets of really interesting perspectives to put forward here. We do have two people that were down in the trenches, front line, sweating it and going home thinking, this is maybe the last day of the rest of my life, or maybe tomorrow is the first day of the rest of my life. And then we had two people, and those are, of course, Todd and Andy. And then we had two people that sat a little bit on the sidelines behind them, on the one hand, coaching them and mentoring them as board members and investors, but also needing to make really tough decisions as to when to give up, when to keep going, how to really sell the keep going if you kept going, which I know in some cases you did. So I'm very quickly going to turn it over to them to just say like 2 or 3 words on their background and their experience, and then I'll kick off the conversation. So Anthoine, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Maria. So Anthoine Papiernik, I'm a managing partner and chairman of Sofinnova, which is a venture capital firm, a specialist of investing in medical technologies, in life science in general. So I've had the real pleasure of working with 3 gentlemen over several companies for most of them. So yeah, I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Jay.
I'm Jay Watkins. I am a partner at Sonder Capital, which is a venture firm focused on very early stage, and I mean sometimes before there's a name for the company, investment opportunities. Have had the pleasure to work truly with everyone here on the stage. I think some of the appeal of this session, it sort of reminds me a little bit of car racing where people watch it for the crashes, and this is a little bit about sort of the crashes, what they look like, and how they unfold real time. I'm very happy to be here and participate in it.
Great, Todd.
Great, thank you. I'm Todd Powell and CEO of RefleXion. I think along with Andy representing the crashes today, but surviving those crashes as well. Excited to be here. Spent most of my career in medtech over the last 30 or so years, early on as an engineer, and then more recently, various levels of leadership, big companies and small alike. Good to be here.
Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy Weiss. Until January of this year, I was president and CEO of ReCor Medical, the company that has been winning in the renal denervation space to treat hypertension. I spent about 10 years at GE Medical, most of that at GE Healthcare. I was at Medtronic for 5 years and then saw the light and went to startups. So I've spent about half my career in startups, half in large cap. Anthoine was an investor in my last 2 startups, ReCor, which is on the green side of the ledger, and Coaxia. Before that, we failed and lost some money there, but we've made it up at ReCor so far.
Well, thank you, guys. So as you see, a lot of great experience. We were reflecting on near death, and it's interesting because the panelists here can talk about 2 levels of near death. We're very familiar with challenges that any of the companies that we all represent face, but it is a little more rare to talk about a category undergoing a near-death experience. And there were 2 that came to mind when I was reflecting on it. And very recently, there was one of those with scaffolds when the late thrombosis clinical data came and most programs shut down. But Andy was there firsthand and experienced what the HTN-3 data from Ardian/Medtronic created a before and after for the highly promising initial run at renal denervation with an interventional procedure. So Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, for those of you in the audience who haven't followed the renal denervation space, the concept is by killing the nerves that are surrounding the renal arteries, you can interrupt the signals from the brain to the kidneys, which can cause high blood pressure. And we at ReCor felt very strongly that that mechanism of action could manage blood pressure by cutting those nerves or ablating those nerves. And thanks to Mano, who I hope's in the audience, my partner and the founder, along with Anthoine and Jacques, the founder of ReCor, they felt they had a unique technology that could uniquely and safely ablate the nerves and treat blood pressure. For those of you who don't know, there are about 150 million Americans with high blood pressure, about 200 million Europeans, so it's a big indication. You may know that Ardian was one of the first companies in the field. Medtronic acquired them for about $1 billion. They were in a very, very large trial under an IDE for pivotal, over 300 patients. And when the trial results were announced in January of 2014, their trial was negative. So there was basically no treatment effect. And there were many other firms that tried to get into this space alongside Medtronic and Ardian and ReCor. And within 30 days, everyone left the field because the general sense was if Medtronic couldn't do this, then obviously it didn't work or it was undoable. And I'll say that that was sort of the inflection moment that we as a board had to face. Anthoine and his team had put a lot of money into ReCor and was facing really a pivotal moment, which is, what do we do? Do we add more money? Do we try again? And so all of the lessons learned came from that. I don't know how far you want me to go, but the long story short, that was
a little.
That was 9 years ago, and what we had put together, and there are a few lessons learned here, and then I'll stop. So first of all, face reality. The whole field was reset. The moment Medtronic was negative, it was basically the whole field was set ground back to zero. So we had to basically reprove all of the science, all of the clinical evidence from scratch. And so then we had to make sure we had the right team that was scaled, costed, and ready to go reprove the science. So we had to create the best clinical trials with the best team and focus 100% of our efforts to do that. That was the value creation effort for the investors and for patients.
Andy, just because I know the story a little bit, how important was it to connect with thought leaders that were true believers?
Yeah, so we believed in the science, and in order to really reprove the fundamental science and efficacy, Mano, Helen, Leslie, Neil, and I went to the most critical thought leaders in the field, the physicians, and we spent a lot of time listening to them. How can you, does this work? How can you design a trial? How can you implement it? And then we followed, I hate to say it, one of the Jack Welch, truisms from my years there, which was control your destiny or someone else will. So we worked with our board and investors to say, if we're going to run these trials and make this actually valuable for patients and investors, we got to control every single aspect of them. So we ran the trials with our own team, no CRO. We controlled every single site. We controlled recruitment, the procedure, data collection, every single thing to make sure that if we're going to spend the time to run these trials, we were going to do it 100% right. And I think that's what paid off. The other part along the way is navigating everything else, like raising money, communicating with the team, keeping the board informed, and communicating transparently every single step of the way for every high and low. And then it takes unbelievable resiliency for you and your team. And if there's one lesson I learned, get people that you can talk to truthfully, be 100% transparent every day, because if there's people on your team that can't handle the truth, they shouldn't be on your team. People that can deal with that, they're the people that will stick with you and they'll make you successful. So, this was clearly a face reality. It was a sector reset. Go back to the basics, realize what that is, and go do it. I don't know, Jay and Anthoine, you lived through this the whole time. You guys have insights from the board and investor perspective, right?
And I was going to turn it over to Anthoine because you are an investor. The category is clearly publicly slaughtered.
It felt...
And and you take a chance on that crazy guy out there and this crazy guy on stage, and you sell that to your LPs, and you look like you're on top of the world?
Well, there were some lonely moments, let's say, because you'd go into a conference like this one, and it says, this is my investment in renal denervation, and people would say, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. You know, I'm so sorry. So this is, I mean, renal denervation became really a joke.
A four-letter word.
There were dozens of companies, because everyone understood the power of finding a solution to hypertension. So, but then, okay, we were there, and no choice is a choice. It's like, okay, what do we do? Do we stop and pull the plug, which is something you can do, or do we believe that there is indeed something there? And I mean, we talked about some of the key guys. One of them was Michel Azizi, actually, all the way from Paris. And he was a hypertension clinician. A big part of the issue with the HTN3 trial was that we were talking to the interventional cardiologist, not to the hypertension specialist. If you asked him, what do you think? Do you think that works? And yeah, actually, I know it works because I've actually run my own study, and I know it works. Okay, so if the clinicians are convinced, they have conviction that this can work, we did exactly what Andy and Mano said to do. It's like, okay, let's just run that study with the same dedication that this clinician, this public hospital clinician in France had done, proving that it worked. And that's, the results were outstanding. I mean, I've rarely seen p-values in the medtech space that were of the 0.001 that the...
And for those that don't know, we ran and completed 3 blinded, randomized, sham-controlled trials. Each one's positive. Over 600 patients were enrolled. We recruited millions to get there, and we're now at the final stages in the FDA process. Hopefully, we'll have FDA approval on this summer. So it's still, it's not done.
Yeah.
Jay?
I lived through this one as chair of the board, trying to keep the investors and the management team from jumping over the cliff. I sort of led off with an analogy about car racing and crashes, but my real view of startups is that they generally don't fail in a catastrophic, traumatic, cloud of dust. They actually roll to a stop, and that process is the process, I think, that we experienced at ReCor. And when they roll to a stop, they usually roll to a stop because they're missing fuel of 2 kinds. One is capital, just pure capital, okay? And in some senses, oddly, weirdly, that's the easiest thing to tap. The other piece is the hard piece of the fuel. And I think what happened at ReCor in part was they kept the focus on the proof of potential. And it was those proofs, like Michel Azizi, who came forward at a really fundamental level and addressed potential. And so that never really waned. And we were able to architect interest in continuing, which was a hard thing. I mean, you look at the investors in those circumstances, it's hard to imagine, okay, now I'm gonna put some more money in here and expect great things following Medtronic. So I think those elements of fuel that are commitment, because you have proof of potential, that's currency. That's real currency. It's like money in the bank. And so I believe that Mano and Andy did just an exceptional job of keeping that and elevating that to the front. So.
Thank you. There's something you guys have mentioned, which I had experienced as well. This idea of going to the clinician that understands the disease the best and champions it for their patients.
Yep.
is incredibly fundamental. Often we have developed tools that other clinicians can use, but they don't understand the disease. They don't understand some of that happens in the heart failure space. But it was phenomenal that there was someone that was so convincing and such an expert and was part of that potential sort of currency that you've mentioned. So I'm gonna switch gears to the company, and I think at some point in time, Anthoine, I want to make sure that you tell the audience what you call the near-death experience, because I'm not going to use your words, but you can. Todd, there's a little bit of an FDA-induced near-death experience that you have gone through during COVID years as well, and through what is a very challenging healthcare access and financing time. So walk us a little bit through that, and then I'll have Jay partner with you on some of that as well.
That sounds great. Thanks, Maria. And you're right, it was during COVID, which amazingly we almost forget because it somehow made COVID seem a little less severe. And we were definitely in our own little storm. Just a real quick bit of background might be useful about how our machine works. So we're a radiation therapy company, but we target the radiation to the cancer in a new way that no one has ever done before. The concept is actually really straightforward, even though there are a bunch of electromechanical miracles to make it happen. And what we do is we inject a PET tracer. That PET tracer, as I'm sure you all appreciate, collects in the cancer and then begins to emit signals. And we've made a machine that is sensitive to that, not too dissimilar from a PET scanner, which obviously would collect multiple signals over time to form an image. That's not what we do. We collect those signals in real time and then immediately send therapeutic radiation back to the source of those signals, which is the cancer. And of course, because we're locking on in a homing beacon-like fashion to the cancer itself, and we light up all the cancer in the body, it starts to create opportunities to not only do a better job of targeting the cancer itself, but getting that same therapeutic benefit to metastatic disease in patients that are presently beyond the reach of existing radiation therapy. So as we started to go into this process, we had multiple Q-subs with the FDA, and we explained our rationale for the type of evidence we were going to produce, which was all going to be benchtop evidence. A lot of people are surprised to learn that that's how radiation therapy machines are cleared. They all have a 510K process pointing back to a prior machine. So we did a similar thing where we pointed back to a prior machine that was similar, and we also pointed to a PET-CT, and we figured that those two devices coming together with novel software and capability in between them is what unlocks the potential of our device. Had FDA agreement on that. Submitted a 510K, that was sort of late 19, and then in sort of December of 19, we learned that they had changed their mind. They didn't believe that was the right approach any longer, and they actually wanted us to take two different approaches, the second of which was undetermined to address questions that weren't asked with evidence that was not defined. And other than that, the 510K was going great. So we wound up getting cleared in Q1 of 2020 for conventional radiation therapy because our machine can support that too. Think of it kind of as the backward compatible mode that puts us on a level playing field. But of course, none of us were there to be another conventional machine. It was in some sense comforting, but it was clearly not the value proposition of the company or the clinical indications that it would represent. So then we had to spend and really just take a total reset and go back and unlearn everything that the FDA believed they understood about our machine, because we learned through the process where they brought in the drug branch, which participated in our review time, that the drug branch had no idea what we were really trying to do. And they were brought into the review team late in the process and completely reset the opinions. And so we had to sort of unlearn 40 or 50 years of radiation therapy and how that was managed through the FDA's minds, because we, again, do things completely differently. No one does anything like we do. And we had to unlearn all that and then re-educate them on that process. We had to invent a new clinical trial approach. We had to produce clinical data. We had to define endpoints that didn't exist in the industry. We wound up filing IP on that, which was maybe another little silver lining about the approach. Defined all of that study through 2020, ran the clinical study through 21, submitted a de novo application after getting breakthrough device designation in 22, and then we're just cleared about a month ago. And so now we're finally cleared for biology-guided radiation therapy. Thank you. So that's sort of the story in
How
3 minutes.
was the capital available through that time? How was the management of the team through that time?
I mean, it was just an amazing journey, honestly. I mean, I'm so, and I think you said it as well. I mean, I think we're all saying it here, and I think this panel represents the notion that you've got to be transparent. You got to keep everybody close. It is all about the management team and the board relationships, making sure that you don't run out of the fuel along the way as you get what was effectively a $150 million reset for the company, right? Took 2.5 years, a lot of capital. We didn't lose a single member of the management team through that process. And every blow that we would have with the FDA to kind of realize just how much they didn't know or misunderstood, where we got kind of comforting yeses early on turned into very uncomfortable no's very quickly. That was tough. It was really tough, but it was that transparency. It was bringing in the KOLs, as you mentioned yourself, Maria, and others, to backstop the story and to talk about the patients and the opportunity. It was an incredible journey, and we did raise a lot of capital during that time, and it was all about keeping our eye on the ball, right? It wasn't about all of this is just the noise in the way, and if you believe you have something new that no one else can do and it's different, it's clinically valuable, you just gotta keep the faith and keep chugging along, provided you can have people that also believe and will pay for that journey. Okay?
Sure. So Jay was there before you, and he was there when the promise was huge, but it had to be proven. And I know that you needed to raise not an insignificant amount of money for that time on a very binary outcome. Do you want to tell a little bit about how that went?
Yeah, you mean
The financing?
first financing? First financing?
Yeah, the third.
So, RefleXion in some ways has been a long series of impossible financings, starting with the first one, which was summed up as we need to raise $13 million to build a prototype, and it'll take us 1.5 years. And if we build this prototype on one day, we're going to learn one of two things. It looks pretty good and promising, or you lost $13 million, okay? And so it was a completely binary $13 million bet. And you can imagine walking into venture capitalists in 2009 with that value proposition was a little tough. So we failed spectacularly. It took us 2 years of conversations to accumulate 50 turndowns from investors. So we kept like we all do, right? We kept a spreadsheet, and we color-coded it. And so I was sharing with
Shades of red?
Yeah, well, it was red. I mean, every block on this spreadsheet was red because we had been turned down by pick your venture people, okay? And so accidentally, we ended up in a conversation with Pfizer trying to learn more about PET tracers because we didn't know a lot about PET tracers at the time. And they called up a couple weeks later and said, we'll fund the whole thing. And we were kind of like, our phone was broken or something. And so we were not actually expecting capital from them. And yet they stepped up, and this was Bill Burkhoff, and offered to fund $13 million and send us a term sheet. So
What did you realize had happened
yeah,
that you had missed?
And this goes a little bit to the point I was trying to make about keeping the focus on the proof of potential. What Bill had done was socialize the visit we had made to the drug side, and the drug folks had come back to Bill and said, you mean that if we had a patient with multiple tumors, we could potentially scan that patient with the radiation, have all those tumors signal where they were and get radiation therapy, and we could do that in a sort of traditional one tumor setting? Their reaction was, we don't know if this will work, but we need to know whether it'll work, because imagine that we could debulk those patients, those advanced state patients, to whom and for whom there's a whole generation of drugs coming. We could have less cancer, between us and total success with the drugs. And so it became a story about the many facets of cancer therapy that have to come together to really, relegate cancer to as Sam Mason, the founder, says, to a chronic condition that's treatable. That potential, I mean, we had sort of had a sense of it, but we really didn't have it in focus until that conversation with Bill Burkhoff. And then Anthoine and I had conversations over time about this opportunity, and Anthoine said, he was interested in taking another look, and that's what led to our closing a Series A round with $13 million, led by Sofinnova Partners with Pfizer and Venrock, on a binary outcome where we had to spin this thing 60 RPM and hope it stayed in the parking lot.
You didn't tell me it was binary. You told me that's.
I did.
You told me no,
binary.
it's going to work.
I
Don't
did.
worry, it's going to work. And you know what the thing that was the most convincing was, because we did our diligence, and I mean, the engineer said you could turn that thing at 60 RPM. And then the other thing was,
but we hadn't done that yet, by the way.
Yeah. No, we had to buy two old machines at $500,000 each or something to undo them and check that this was going to work. And it did. Yeah. So you were right.
It worked.
So that part was good. The other part was
the FDA.
The FDA, it was clear cut that this was a 510K with no clinical, with a major reason to invest. For sure. Yeah. We learned the hard way a few years later that it was not exactly the case. But today we have an amazing machine that works and that is approved by the FDA, that many patients are now, benefiting from. So,
and I think what Anthoine's describing there is that the venture community did its due diligence on the FDA. This wasn't like, oh yeah, and gosh golly, we got to get this thing approved. So I wonder what it was. This is a big bet. We were at the time period when Todd's referencing, there were probably a couple $100 million in the company, I would say, at that point in time. So this is not like we're, three guys and a dog trying to market a business plan. I mean, this thing's running, okay, and it's big dollar running, and so. When that event occurred, when there was a change in course from the FDA, it was against everything the investors knew and expected. Think about that. You thought it was a 5. I thought it was a 5. It wasn't a 510K. It was a as Todd described, it was another year and a half, 2 years, and $150 million of capital. So one of the questions you can ask yourself is, well, okay, so why didn't the company die right there? Okay, and two things. One is they didn't stop turning over the cards on what the proof of the potential of the technology was. We started actually talking a lot more to drug companies, for example, other drug companies, not just Pfizer. So. And ultimately, today, have some very strong relationships as a result into the pharma community. Again, kind of keeping that potential kind of data stream, developing and sort of convincing people that there's something out there that was worth it. The other thing we did, which was referenced from this stage, I think in a conversation yesterday about raising capital, and I think it's a really important message for folks who are trying to avoid near-death experiences, is we didn't let the valuation get ahead of where we actually were. And I know that's a controversial sort of statement in the context of entrepreneurship. And full disclosure, I started into this field as an entrepreneur raising money from venture capitalists, so I get it. That said, if you want to have a really traumatic experience with your investor base, it's going to be around encountering a problem where there's not enough headroom left and you've used all of it up, okay? And so, it's always hard to find that set point, but there is there is a right way to balance risk and return as you raise successive rounds and tranches of capital. And so many companies, and particularly true in this environment today, get in trouble because we just don't pay attention to the guideposts.
Maybe a comment more on the people side, because going through a near-death experience is almost okay if you're with people that you think you can die with.
Right.
It sounds silly, but because there are many other near-death experience, because you really hate the people with whom you are. and where, in fact, towards a near-death experience, you start arguing. Yeah. And so here, okay, sometimes you can see the wall, you're accelerating towards the wall, but if you think, okay, we're all going to die together. Sorry to be saying those words, but that's the truth. Yeah. Because the only way to survive those type of things is if you are with people with whom, you feel, okay, it might be our last moments, but, and we did go through that with Coaxia. We died together in Coaxia. Well, okay, we sold the company for a pitiful amount to Zoll, but in the end, when I was on the other side of this, we lost the money, and I thought, management had done an amazing job. Yeah, we sort of opened the box, and the study was negative, but management did an amazing job. And then when I had, to pick a new CEO to lead operation at ReCor from the US, I thought, okay, this guy, I went to war, he went to war for us, and he is someone I want to back. So I know it's cheesy, but it is all about the people. Yep. It's okay to live through, the best way to live through a near-death experience is with people, and I'm repeating myself, that you can actually die with.
For those in the audience, though they're CEOs or investors, I think one of the things that I take away from here, my last 20 years in this field with you guys, is the ability to build trust between the board and management. And the way you do that is management do everything it can to manage the business, plan ahead, respond, communicate, be transparent. That trust building, gives you the resiliency to overcome problems. Even when you're in the trenches saying, okay, we're ReCor, we don't have any money left, who in the world would give us money after the HTN-3 Medtronic failure? And you all put your heads together, you're in the trenches and you do it together. I've also been on a number of boards where they end up to be circular firing squads. And so as investors and as CEOs, the thing to do is just build the trust through communication, planning, commitment, and then when you encounter problems, because you guys know there's a problem every week, right? So that the trust level gives you the resiliency to overcome those. And, running Coaxia, we ran trials, missed our endpoint, got turned down by the FDA. The management team worked for 6 months at half pay to try to get whatever chance we could to get a positive outcome because the commitment level was there. And at ReCor, the same thing. When the HTN-3 results came out negative, Mono called me from Europe. It was 5:30 in the morning. And we immediately said, okay, what does that mean for our business? Because you got to face reality, and you've got to be able to have that trust level with the board. If there's one thing I take away from this group of the 5 of us, is we've worked together over the years, and we've built that kind of trust. And my advice for investors and CEOs is get to that trust level.
It's interesting. There's one thing that nobody has said here over the last 35 minutes or so, which is give up, or even thinking of giving up, or even thinking of contingency planning. I mean, it's about believing and keep going. I guess keep going until the bitter end.
We had the it doesn't work, close the business scenarios, both at Coaxia and at ReCor. We had the whole Gantt, the branch tree and the odds and what we would do. And
was that behind closed doors, or was that open to everyone?
Management team and the board, and the company. We had weekly meetings with the company. Here's where we are, how much money we have, what the odds are, and we would say to people, if this is too much risk for you and your families, we get it. We'd love you to stay, but it's got to be a volunteer organization every day.
Absolutely. We say that all the time. I think we really try to be as transparent as we possibly can, not just with management, obviously with our board, but with the whole company. I mean, people want to know. And if you're not filling in those details, the details that they will assume might actually be worse. And I suppose by definition they're worse because they're not grounded in plans and activities and data, right?
I mean, from an investor standpoint, our own investors, the limited partners, have the benefit of hindsight, and sometimes giving up should have been the best option. We need to know about this, and there are many. Sometimes because of who we are, we tend not to give up. But sometimes you should have given up $10 million before. It's called hindsight. The beauty is when you have experiences like this, where you build companies that are new categories. Yeah, I mean, you will lose some by not giving up, but all you gain from building companies that can be huge companies, huge new categories, I think certainly pays for that. You need to have a few of those in order to convince your LPs that you're not completely crazy by just not knowing when to stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can remember I worked for Joe Mandato, who some of you may know, and Joe used to say, hey, we can fail quickly, and we can do that in a bar. So if you think about these contingency plans, usually they look pretty much like we expect they would look. First we lay everybody off, and then we shut the doors, and then pretty soon we're nowhere. Those things are quick, and so they exist and they're out there, and I think they're in the management consciousness of great leaders like these two folks we have on the stage, but it's not what you focus on, because your focus, okay, has to be on the things that are harder to do, take a little bit more time, and so what I've noticed in these crises is that if you can get that little pocket of time to move the real issues forward, which are usually not that leg of the decision tree that says shut it down, because we can do that in a bar, okay? They're the leg of the decision tree that says find the proofs and the path to go from here to some kind of success, and that's where the work gets focused. And I think in both these cases, that's exactly what happened.
So I'm taking away a couple of things here. I've heard you, Jay, say a couple of times, we all talk about proof of concept, but I hadn't heard before the proof of potential. And I think potential can be a big number on a slide, but that's not proof of potential. So I think that's a great way of thinking about building any business plan, not even in a near-death experience. The other one is I know this team has worked together in a variety of roles, and you guys have each other's back. But at the end of the day, a conference like this and the networking that happens and the networking that you keep through your career is going to be helpful through the tougher times more so than through the good times, right? So cherish, build, invest. They are give and takes, but those are really, really important. I myself have gone in that slow roll to no capital and close the company. But I have also gone into that slow roll to $10,000 in the bank and transacted in the middle of COVID and sold a company. So believe until the bitter end. I love the fact that the no's are quick. They can happen in the bar. They are in the subconscious of all of us because it's the obvious thing to feel like you need to know or have ready. But that's the easy one. The tough one is the keep going. So I appreciate you sharing candidly all of your experiences, and hopefully this has been helpful for everyone here, and I'm sure the panelists will hang around for the rest of the day and be open to everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria.